All right, good morning, everybody. As you know, we went through this webinar last week, but we had kind of a technical glitch and we accidentally deleted our recording. So we're going to record this again and walk through all the content that we walked through last week and give you the information that we promised we would give you in a recording. So let's go ahead and let's get started. I'll start our presentation. And again, our agenda's on the left-hand side. We don't really have to worry about people muting their microphones this time because it's just myself and Leslie here kind of running through the content. So we're not going to worry about that. And we are going to, same caveats, we pre-recorded the demos for time's sake. And so yeah, we're just going to walk through the same information. So here we go. Our scenario that we want to walk through is that the owner of our company has come to us and said, "Hey, I need to know where all of our accounts are. We're going to do some targeted marketing. We're going to come out with a new product, whatever the scenario is, but we need to know the locations of all of our accounts, all of our customers." So she's asked you to create a dashboard that can show a map that has all of the accounts so they can kind of figure out what to do. So as we approach this problem that has been given to us, this request. First, I want to walk us through some definitions and then talk through all of the decisions that have to be made along the way as we set up an export of Dataverse to be used in Power BI. So the first of our definitions is going to be, what is Azure Data Lake? It's a huge topic, but very quickly, it's actually changed names. So if you've been around for a little while, you know Azure Data Lake used to be a data processing engine. That is now called Azure Synapse. And so when Microsoft is referencing Azure Data Lake, what they really mean is an Azure Data Lake storage group, a storage account. And we'll walk through how to set that up. But just know that when you hear the term Azure Data Lake, we're really talking about a storage account. The tabular data stream is a feature of Dataverse that lets you connect with SQL Server Management Studio, Power BI. I've done some testing with a .NET application. It gives you read-only access to the data, and you can run complex queries. You can do joins and unions and all kinds of things. There are some limitations that you need to know about, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. But just know that it's a feature that lets you run queries against Dataverse. An Azure Storage account is an Azure service that lets you store files or binary data. It does have some queuing mechanisms and things like that, but really, what for our use in this discussion, it is a place to store files. So we'll see that a little bit later. You'll see a reference to CDM, or what's called the Common Data Model. And essentially what's happened here is Microsoft has worked with some partners and they've come up with a standard schema of objects, we'll call it, because it's not really tables, it's objects. And if all of the systems can export their data to the common data model, like an account with these fields, a contact with these fields, invoice, quote, so on, then any system that needs to consume that data just needs to know about the common data model. They don't have to know about any other system, just the common data model. That's kind of what the driver is behind the common data model. How accepted it is, we don't really know for sure, but that's kind of what Microsoft is pushing for. When we talk about API license consumption, we're talking about your licensing of the Power Platform. So whether you have the per app license, the per user multiple apps license, or one of the Dynamics licenses like project operations, field service, sales, customer service, and so on, and the different tiers of those licenses, you get a different number of API executions based upon the license you have. For example, the enterprise license of like Sales Enterprise has, you get 40,000 hits per day. That's a fair amount. We honestly, we have never really seen somebody exceed that. Only one time have I seen a runaway process that consumed a bunch of API hits. So not a huge concern, but it is something that we'll talk about. I just want to make sure you know what it is. So as we get into actually connecting Power BI and Dataverse, we want to point out that there's three ways to connect. You have the TDS endpoint, you have the API, and then you have what we're going to talk about today, a data lake Azure storage account. So let's kind of jump into the details of what these three different options mean. The first thing we have to talk about is security, because security is something we always have to be cognizant of. It's very different between the two methods, between the TDS and API and Azure Storage Account have two different security models. So when I'm connecting with the TDS or API, whatever the account I'm logging in as, whatever security roles it has assigned to that account, that determines the permissions I have. So for example, if I want to run reports against all accounts in the system, but I only have the salesperson role, I'm only going to see the accounts that I own. I can't run reports against accounts across the entire system, only the ones that I have access to. So as you think about that level of security, if you want to go down the TDS and API route, you're probably going to end up with a licensed user, so you're going to have to pay for an extra license that really has access to everything. So probably give it like a sysadmin access would be what you'd end up doing, and that I would not recommend doing that. The Azure Storage account has a very different model of security. You can see on the triangle on the right, on it gets narrower as you go up the triangle. So at the very bottom, you have your Azure subscription. And your Azure subscription is the big bucket of your Azure resources. Inside of a subscription, you create resource groups. And inside of a resource group, you have resources. So a resource group is very simple. It's just a bucket for resources. So you can logically categorize all your Azure resources. And then inside of like I said, inside of the resource group, you have all of your Azure resources. In our example here, we have a storage account. If I have access to the Azure subscription, for example, if you give me the owner privilege to the Azure subscription, I'm going to inherit those privileges all the way down the chain. I don't recommend that because like what we're about to do is export all of our data out of Dataverse to that storage account. So anybody who has owner access to that Azure subscription or that resource group is going to gain access to all of the data that's in that storage account. In our environment, for example, how we set it up, we only have 3 people in the company who have access to the Azure subscription. And even that, it's not the accounts they use every day. We have set aside specific admin accounts for people. Only those accounts have access to the Azure subscription. We will assign permissions at the resource group level and even sometimes like the individual resource level, but typically at the resource group level is where we will assign permissions. So just know that when you're setting up your environment, you need to think about who has access to what and the kind of security you want to look for. When we look at the API connection, we have a couple of considerations that we have to think through. If you've worked with Dataverse for a while, you know that there is a 5,000 record limit for Dataverse. No matter what, no matter how you query it, you're going to get 5,000 records. Now, I'm going to caveat that, and I'm going to say there is one way around it, but you have to be writing .NET code. You can't do it with Power BI or anything like that. But that's the only way around it. You have a 5,000 record limit with the API. This can be a problem. I'll give you if you have a table with more than 5,000 records, for example, in our environment, we have a time entry table, and we run some reports on time entries. And when those reports were set up, they were set up using the API. So initially, it all worked fine. As soon as we hit that 5,000 record limit, all of a sudden the time entry reports didn't quite show up right. There was data missing, something was really weird. Well, we figured it out. It was the 5,000 record limit. So now the person who owns those reports is continually having to do a sliding scale of dates, so we don't hit that 5,000 record limit. We do have to consider our API license consumption because we are hitting the API, so it is going to count against us. But like I said, not a huge concern. It is going to be one of the easier setup options because there's an option inside of Power BI to connect via the API. So that's kind of the pros and cons. Quite honestly, with our next option, there's really not a lot of reasons to use the API, in my opinion. Now, when we hosted this webinar, we did have a question about when you use the visualize this view button inside of Dataverse or Dynamics 365, and that is using the API. I'm pretty confident that is using the API to connect. So that's just something to know when you're looking at that visualize this view. It's a great way to get a good view of the data you're currently looking at, but I probably wouldn't take that Power BI report and use it in a wide scale. So the next way of connecting is going to be the TDS endpoint. And like I said, this gives us the flexibility of running a SQL query, which is really powerful because you can join tables and union tables and those kinds of things. So you can actually make the Dataverse engine or SQL engine do a lot of the work that you might do in Power BI. So it can be very, very flexible. But again, we are consuming our license consumption, and this one is going to be the easiest because there truly is a button in Power BI that says connect via Dataverse SQL. So that is going to be the easiest setup. And if you're concerned about how quickly it is to actually get the data every time you want to refresh, then this is going to give you the quickest performance. But I always remind people, most of the time you're going to publish your Power BI dashboard and then schedule those refreshes in the background. So that performance of the actual refresh doesn't quite matter so much. But if it does, you'll want to look at the TDS endpoint. Oh, one other note I should mention about this one is not all fields are available. I know for sure like a multi-line text field is not available. And there's a couple of other of the obscure data types that just aren't in the TDS endpoint queries. And then the option we're talking about today is using an Azure storage account to store the data. This one, we're not worried about our API license. We don't have a record limit, but it does require setting up an Azure storage account and setting up the export. So as far as the initial setup, this one is going to be the most complex, but in the long run, it's going to give you the most flexibility. Because when we're running queries, I'm not concerned about, do I have access to all records or some records or whatever the case may be. I know I have access to all of it because it's all in the storage account. So let's change gears a little bit. We talked through the options of connecting. So let's change gears a little bit and let's start actually thinking about our setup. When we're setting up the export to the Azure storage account, there are two things that absolutely must be in place. Actually, three. I'm sorry, three things. So your storage account has to be in the same region as Dataverse. There's no way around that. That's the way they've set it up. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. So the easiest way to know what region to create your storage account is to go into the Azure Synapse link setup. And if you look at the very first screen, will show you your environment is here. You can see on the right-hand side, I have it highlighted. Your environment is here, located in the West US. Your storage account must be in one of these two locations. That's the easiest way I know to get that. If you For those of us who have been around the platform for a while, we know that this has always been, well, where's my environment? And there's always been little tweaks or hacks or something to find it, and they were always fairly accurate, but like this tells me where it is. So I'm sure that hopefully they will start to publish this in more prevalent places, but that's what I know now. It also has to be in the same Azure AD tenant as the Power Platform. There is no way around that. So if you're an MSP or another partner, you don't have the option of hosting this for your customer. It has to be in their tenant. And then you can see at the bottom when we're setting up the storage account, and we'll draw your attention to this when we go through the setup, there is one checkbox called Data Lake Storage Gen 2. You have to check the Enable Hierarchical Namespace. If you don't check that, it just won't work. So those things must be in place. We don't have there's nothing to discuss there. We just have those. Storage account permissions. When we're going through the setup, there's three permissions that have to be in place. Even though I created the storage account, I have to go in and assign myself these permissions. I thought it was a little strange, but I had to do it. So you have to have the owner role in the storage account. In the storage account, you must have the storage blog data contributor role. And then in the resource group, you have to have reader access. You have to have those three things. I'm not, seems like if I set up the storage account, I should be able to proceed, but this is how they've set it up. When we're going through the setup, we have an option to select the level of data redundancy we want. There's really two options. You have local redundancy and geo-redundant. What this means is your data is going to be copied either locally, copied to another local. Okay, let me back up. Locally would be inside of like a Microsoft data center. So I have like two servers or two, SANs or whatever you want to call them. My data is stored in two of them, so I'm not. If a hard drive fails or a server dies, my data is not gone. I'm locally redundant inside of that data center. Geo-redundant would mean my data is stored in two different geographic places. So I might have it on the West Coast, and then it might be over on the East Coast. So if there's a catastrophe in either place, I'm not going to be super affected because my data is geo-redundant. The only real consideration here is cost. It's just a little bit more expensive to go with geo-redundant. Not a lot more expensive, but just something to consider as you are going through. What are my needs for this data, and do I need to go have the expense of geo-redundant, or is locally redundant okay? If you need help making those decisions, we're happy to talk you through them. There is no right or wrong answer. It depends on your needs. When we are setting up Azure Synapse Link, there's an option for append only, and you select this on every table. And the difference here is if I have append only instead of in place update, when there are, so the record is created and updated and deleted. With append only, I have the create. I have the initial record in the storage account. If it's updated, there's now another row in the storage account, and every update will create a new row. If I have in place update, then that one row is just updated. When it's deleted with append only, there's a flag that is put on the row called is deleted, but it's only going to mean the last version of that row, not all of them, just the last version. If it's deleted with in-place update, the row is actually deleted from the storage account. The real reason for append only that I can think of, and it's in their docs, is if you're doing like an ETL process and you need to trigger a change with every update. That would be the real reason. If you're running reports, it actually makes it much more confusing to use append only, because now when you're querying data, you have to know, well, which row I'm looking at is the latest version of the row, and you have to start filtering, and it gets really hard. And so if we're running reports, I would recommend in place update. that's what I would do. One thing I do want to bring up about this topic is, and I bring it up because I had this thought. I thought, ooh, could I do this? And the thought was, can I use this as like a change log or a permanent archive storage? And the answer is kind of not really. So append only, yes, you get versions of the record as it changes, but it's not going to be every change. The way that they query the data, they're using a feature of Dataverse called change data tracking. And what that does is every time you query the data with change data tracking, it's going to give you the latest version of the row at that time, but it's going to give you all changes that happened since the last time you checked. But it's only going to give you the latest version of the row at that time. So if I queried the data, say at noon, and there was 10 changes between noon and 12:05, I'm going to get the snapshot at 12:05. I'm not going to get all 10 changes. So yes, you do get different versions of the row, but you don't get every version of the row. It's just important to know as you're thinking about how you could use this feature. The data partitioning, you have an option when you set it up by, again, this is in every table, to select month versus year. The default is month. And really, that's a pretty good default. In our environment, I didn't really bother changing anything from month to year. The only ones that I would really select year on is going to be like a configuration table or setup tables. You put the records in there once. You might change them once or twice a year. That's it. They're really just data that's read over and over again. Otherwise, it's there. You could use it, but the default is month, and really, I think that's a pretty good default. So. All right, so we talked through some of our considerations in our setup, and we kind of looked at some of the caveats that we have to go through. So let's look at actually setting it up. And again, this is pre-recorded, so we're going to watch a video of it being set up, and we'll talk about it after the fact. Here we go.
As we view here, we see the subscription group. Our first step is to create a resource group. In this process, you'll type the name. It requires small letters and no special characters. For the region, it does limit the location of resources in the group, so be careful of what you choose. Tags can help you identify the resource group better. For this example, I have no need for it. So we are going to the next page. Then it's going to validate, making sure the name is available. After validation, we're going to create the group and it'll bring us back to the main page. After clicking into the resource group, we are going to create a storage group. In the marketplace, search for a storage group account, and we are going to use that first one and create it. The name has the same restriction as the previous, so small letters and no special characters. When choosing the region, you want it to be the same as the resource group, so I chose West for the last one, so I'll choose West again. For redundancy, it is changeable at any time, but it depends on what you are wanting. The cost and the availability are factors to consider. On the next page, the most important checkbox we click is enabling hierarchical namespace. It can't be changed once created. On the next couple of pages, there's going to be nothing that I want to change, but they can all be changed after it is and created. On this page, the customer managed keys cannot be changed after it's created, so it is important to know what you are wanting. Next is tags. I will also not be using this example. After that, go to review, double check everything, and then create your storage group. The last step before connecting to Power BI is going to Power Apps and using the Azure Synapse link, which creates a container, which is required for connecting to Power BI.
So like you can see on the right-hand side there, I said it'll tell you where your environment is located, that's where I'm talking about. You go to your Azure Synapse link for Dataverse, and then you just start the setup, and it'll tell you right there what where your environment is. Okay, so that's the end of our video. You can see how we set up. So I'm going to show you really quick what it looks like in our environment, and then we'll go to the next steps. So you can see here we have our Azure Synapse link for Dataverse. This is our export. You can see all the tables and the last date and time they were synced, the number of records, whether or not they're append only. I do not have any append only tables. All of them are in place update, and all of them are partitioned by month. And then in our storage account, we have our containers. So this is our storage account, and we have the containers. This is the container that that this process creates these two containers. I did not create these containers. So when I open up this container, there's a folder for every table that is selected. And you can see there's a CSV file partitioned by month. So 2003, so May of 2003, there was apparently some records created in May of 2003 that, yeah, I didn't know we had records created in May 2003, but apparently we do. What else? Oh, I was going to say, yeah, okay. Yep. So there we go. That's what it looks like when the setup is done. You have your Synapse link, and then you have your containers with your data in there. So let's go to the mid-session Q&A. I don't recall that we had any questions, so we'll move on. So far, we have created our resource account, and we've exported data from Dataverse to that resource account using the Azure Synapse Link feature of Dataverse. So now what we need to do is we need to grab that data out of the storage account, pull it into Power BI so we can create the map that shows us where all of our accounts are. Again, we are using the storage account. So yeah, so let's get started. We're gonna demo connecting Power BI Power BI to that storage account. And just a note, this one is pre-recorded like the other one. There's a couple of steps that really do take quite a while. So let's walk through it.
The first step is to use the Get Data option. We're going to use Azure, specifically in the Data Lake Storage Gen 2 option. This next part is where it gets a little tricky. It comes to the URL, it is very specific.
Okay, one note here. This is one of the issues of pre-recording. We did not record this video very long ago, and in that time, they have changed the URL that they expect. You can see in the screenshot, it's showing, account name, the URL container subfolder. They've since changed that to the URL on the bottom, and I'll show you really quick where you get that information because it can be a little bit tricky. So when they're talking about the account name, they're talking about the account name of the storage account. So in our case, it is True North Dataverse when we connect to it. When they're talking about the name of the container, they're talking about this long name here. So those are the two pieces of information you need to make up that URL.
This is the model I will use, but for this example, I have pulled together the information that we have created from the storage account. Then we will sign in using our credentials. Then we're going to choose the CDM file.
So there's that reference to CDM that I was talking about. That's that common data model.
Then we will select the specific tables that we want to bring over. Then we will load it into Power BI. This next part will take a while. But once it's complete, you'll see the data on the right-hand side ready to use.
All right, so let's create the visualization off of that data. So I'm going to hop over to Power BI, and you can see in my example dashboard, I have the account table exported. And remember, our goal is to create a map because they want to see where the accounts are located so they know where to do marketing. So our first step is to add a map visualization. So let's add a map over here. I'm going to drag it a little bit on the right-hand side and make it a little bigger. And then we're going to take the address latitude. So wait a minute. Yeah, I want, where's latitude? Okay, I want latitude and I want longitude. But it's okay, it's telling me an error, but that error actually makes sense because by default, Power BI wants to summarize or sum or average or do something with the data. We need to tell it, don't do anything with this data. So we're going to say, don't summarize that. And we're going to say, don't summarize that. And now we give that just a moment. And there's our map. And these are the locations of our accounts. Let's make this a little bit more useful. And we're going to add what's called a slicer. So I did that last time too. And one of these days I'll learn. So I'm going to not select that visualization. And we're going to add a slicer. I'm going to move that over here to the left. And then we're going to slice it based on, let me expand the account a little bit. We're going to slice it based on state. So I want to find state province. And there we go. So now when I select, for example, let's go Colorado, it automatically filters the map down to the customers that are in Colorado or Illinois or Washington. I know has quite a few. Because this is sample data, it makes sense that Microsoft would have a bunch in Washington. Apparently there's one in Tampa. So there we go. We've created our visualization. And so now we can publish this up into the Power BI. We can set up a schedule to keep it up to date. And the owner of our company can have the data that she needs to make the decision on marketing. So that's the visualization that we went through, or that's that's the visualization we created off of the data we exported from Dataverse to the storage account using the Azure Synapse link feature of Dataverse. So that's our re-recording of the webinar we did last week, and now we will share this with you so you can start to really take advantage of the data you have in Dataverse and use it anywhere you need to. So with that, thank you very much, and we appreciate your attention, and we appreciate that you came to our webinar. Thank you.